Hello and welcome to my channel In Search of Wonder. My name is Anne and this is my weekly wrap up. Be sure to watch to the end because I have another book that I would like to give to one of my subscribers. Hello. It is Thursday evening, the first day of August, and I just finished reading I Must Betray You by Ruta Sepetys, and oh my goodness. This book made me chuckle once or twice. It made me incredibly tense at times, wondering what was going to happen. It made me gasp out loud. It made me cover my eyes in horror. It made me cry. All of the things. And it taught me a lot about a time period of history that I lived through, but I was only 9, so I don't remember much about it except for hearing about the Ceausescu's, who was the dictator of Romania, and the fall of communism, the fall of the Berlin Wall, and all of that stuff. I remember all of that stuff happening when I was little, but I knew very little of the details of it, and because it was history in the making and not history yet, obviously I didn't learn about it in school, so it's like a gap in my life, in my knowledge of history, where I wasn't old enough to truly understand what was going on and grasp the issues and remember them. But it wasn't long enough ago that I was able to learn about it. So I'm really glad that Ruta Sepetys is writing these books and sharing these important stories. She's writing it to a young adult audience, and I really, really wish that more young adults were reading them. Most of the time I see grown women like myself reading these books and appreciating them and valuing them, but I really wish more young adults would read this. It's such a valuable part of history that needs to be told. But also, this book in particular by Ruta Sepetys, people my age should read it, because I'm sure we're all in the same boat, that we lived through this, but we don't know much about it. Now, it's opened a door for me of curiosity, of things that I want to know more about the whole Eastern Bloc of communism and the fall of communism and the different people involved. I know snippets and bits from here and there. I know names of people and places and things, you know, from prominent events, but I don't know much else. Anyway, this is, sorry, I was interrupted, but this is very well written, engrossing, and very easy to read. The chapters are short and I just flew through it. 5 stars. And August is off to a fantastic start for me. Speaking of August, so I'm doing the deck of TBR-athon, and it is very fun. So if you don't know anything about that, I'm not sure if you can join in at this point, but anyways, it's hosted by, oh goodness, wow. Every time I go to say the name of a channel, like, it leaves my mind. Chloe, I know is her name. And she has a co-host as well. I will link their names in the description box. But the idea is you pull a random card from a deck of cards, and there are various prompts that go with it, and you can earn points for your team. My first one, this one I started actually in July, so it doesn't count for that. But my first draw, I forget what the number was, maybe a 9. And so I had to have an object on the cover. So that worked well with several other prompts from other challenges that I'm doing with Ketchupathon and Chantel's Read Yourself challenge. Worked great for that. So I knocked off 3 challenges with the 1 book. I haven't read it yet, but that was my first draw that I'm going to read. And then I wanted to draw one for something to have on my Kindle for when I need something to read on my Kindle and not a physical book. And for that one, I forget what I drew and what was the prompt. Oh yeah, I forget what the number was, but the prompts were either 400, 500, or 600 pages. And For a Lifetime by Gabrielle Meyer is exactly 400 copies, at least on the, that's what it said on Hoopla when I went to look at it. And so it only gives me 1 point for this readathon challenge, but that works for me. It's a book I've been wanting to read, and so that's what I have going now. In addition, I want to read one more big book for Big Book Summer, and that is And the Dead Shall Rise. So I'm going to try to work on that daily throughout the month of August and try to wrap that up by the end of August so that I can have those. I will have done 3 big books then. So I'm pretty happy about that. Things are progressing pretty well. So yeah. Hello, it is Monday morning and I have finished my first book of August, and that is Jane Austen's First Love by Syrie James. So for the deck of TBR-athon, the first card that I drew was a number 9. 9, I don't remember, 9 what? 9 somethings, hearts, clubs, I don't know. And the category for 9 is something on the cover. And for 5 points, if I read a book with a building on the cover, then that got me 5 points for the deck of TBR-athon for the red team. So I finished this one yesterday. It also, I think I mentioned this maybe already, but it also fit for Chantel's Read Your Shelf challenge for August, which the Conan Doyle side was to have a house on the cover. So, and then it also fit for the Ketchupathon for the burgers and dogs prompt to have a building on the cover. So I knocked out 3 challenges with this book and I really enjoyed it. Syrie James also wrote The Missing Memoirs of Jane Austen, I think, and The Lost Manuscript of Jane Austen, which were kind of fictionalized accounts and dual timeline looks at Jane Austen's life, but through the perspective of a newly discovered book that she had written or manuscript or her supposedly written memoirs. I really enjoyed both of those very much. I also enjoyed this. The writing was really good. I'll start with the one thing that brought it down a little bit for me as far as my personal enjoyment goes. And that was that it's definitely more of a young adult book. It comes across very much that way because Jane in this story, as it implies, it's her first love. She is a teenager. She is a young teenager. She is 15, turning 16 in the course of the story. And bonus points for Syrie James because she wrote her very well. You see Jane Austen's basic personality and perspective and abilities and capabilities, but very young in the person of a very young teenager. And she behaves like a 15-year-old girl would behave in that time. It's still consistent with the time and the place and everything, but she is young, and also the young man that she's interested in is young and immature, and they have a lot to learn. They're not unlikably so. They're not unlikably immature. It's just, it is honestly really well done, written as the age that they are supposed to be. But I guess I didn't take that into consideration when I picked up the book. It was just very young adult for me. But it was well done in that sense. So it's not necessarily a complaint. It just was a preference thing. I guess I would prefer to read a more mature storyline, circumstance, situation. What I also enjoyed about this book is that Syrie James wrote it very cleverly. I like what she did here. She definitely was taking massive cues from Mansfield Park. It's not a rewriting of Mansfield Park per se, but she uses elements of the plot in Mansfield Park. She takes these true historical characters, which I believe in the author's note, I believe all of them are actual characters except for one of family, I think. She takes these actual historical characters and actual historical events, and then she superimposes onto that and works that into plot points taken from Mansfield Park and characters taken from Mansfield Park, and experiments with it and creates a fictional, but still historically accurate as far as that goes, story. So kind of very, very clever. I really like how she did that. It was a very interesting aspect of the story. And she also incorporates A Midsummer Night's Dream into the story as well. So really just well written. So I appreciated that. I like how she wove all the different ideas together to create an interesting story. I feel like she stayed true to the character and what we know to be true of the characters in this story, particularly Jane Austen and her family members. The other characters in this story, the real historic ones, their personalities and their life stories are a little more shadowy, not as much history available about them. But she stayed true to all of the facts, but she just embellished it significantly with this story. And overall, well done. I enjoyed it. I think I gave it 3.5 stars, rounded up to 4 on Goodreads. Not my favorite by this author, but not because it was poorly written or lacking historical accuracy or depth or anything like that. Nothing really negative to say, except that it was very heavily on the young adult aspect of things in terms of both the main characters and also the plot as it developed and the decisions that the characters made. It was the whole concept was kind of predicated on the maturity level of the people involved, the characters involved. So it was a very strong young adult feel to it, which was just not a preference for me. So overall, I really enjoyed it though. And then my next draw for the TBR-athon was, the deck of TBR-athon was a number 4. And 4 is a long book. And so the 3 options were 400, 500, or 600 pages. And I went with the 400 pages only because For a Lifetime by Gabrielle Meyer, that's been on my TBR for a couple of months and I haven't gotten to yet, and I really wanted to get to that one. And it is exactly 400 pages according to Goodreads and Hoopla. So the way I'm reading it on Hoopla and like the size of the print and everything that I have, the way it's set up, it actually shows like 359 pages, but we're going by Goodreads and they say 400 pages. So that gives me 1 point for the red team, and I have started that one. So I'm really enjoying it and really getting into the story. It's Gabrielle Meyer's writing just really pulls you in right away, and you want to know more about what is happening. You want to uncover the secrets along with the characters. You want to know what is going to happen next. And she's just writes a really compelling story in that way. So I'm really enjoying it. And I'm also working on And the Dead Shall Rise. I've picked that back up. I took a break from that in July so I could focus on Les Miserables. But that is my 3rd big book for the big book summer that I want to finish. And I am picking that back up and reading some every day. And that is what I have working at the moment. So I probably will pick up something else as the week goes on. I know Kelly and I are going to be reading Ruth by Elizabeth Gaskell. So I need to pick that up and get started on that so I can finish that in the month of August. So I will be picking that up at some point this week as well. So that's what I've got going on this week. It is Wednesday morning and I have 2 books to update about. The first one is How to Study Your Bible by Kay Arthur. Now this one I came across when I was doing my summer on haul project here. And I was trying to get rid of books on my shelf. And I just had too many. I particularly had so many Christian nonfiction that I really needed to weed it out. And so there were some books that I thought, well, I need to either read this one or get rid of it. And so this is one that was in that stack that I read. And I'm so glad that I did. I have read books and I've gone through studies about the inductive method of studying the Bible before. But it was good to get a refresher and to actually systematically use Kay Arthur's process in particular as I've studied through the book of Colossians over the summer. And I'm almost done with that. And I've been really loving spending time digging deep into Colossians, especially Colossians chapter 2 is just amazing. One of my favorite chapters in the Bible, I think now. Anyway, this book was very, very helpful, very useful, very practical. And I agreed with everything that she said about the approach to Bible study and biblically going through the process of studying and understanding the Bible and how she approaches that. So I didn't have any issues with that on that score. On a more practical level, I wish that it was organized a little bit better for someone to use as a guide to systematically studying through a book of the Bible. It kind of starts out like that's what it's going to be, but in the end, what it becomes is a little bit more hodgepodge of like all of the best ways to and best practices for studying Bible and or different ways to study the Bible and how to use different tools. It's not like, okay, we're going to do this and then we're going to move to the next thing and we're going to do this. It's kind of like you have to have all of these systems in place at the same time when you're going to do this study, at least the way the material was presented in this book. And I found it a little bit confusing and a little bit overwhelming, to be honest, to attempt to follow her system for Bible study
in a systematic way. And I'm having a really hard time explaining what I mean by that. So I apologize. And it's not that it's not worth it. Like, this is a really good book. The books that I have read about inductive Bible study have been, well, there was one other one that I read that I can't remember now who wrote it. And I haven't done a side-by-side comparison with this one, so I couldn't tell you which one was better or worse in that regard. The other one that I have used was involved in a method very similar to Kate Arthur's Step by Step, minus the underline and using different colors and symbols for keywords, whatever. That other book was one, it was like, you know, self-published by someone who gave a seminar at our church, and so it's not really like widely available or anything. And that one was very helpful, and it was very similar to this one. And it was a lot more systematic, but it was also a lot smaller, and it didn't go into as much detail about different aspects of Bible study as this one. And then last summer, our church went through a video series on studying the Bible, but I actually had a similar issue in that it wasn't quite systematic. It was just each week was a different topic of something to consider when you're studying the Bible. And it wasn't like, okay, start here and then do this and then do that, which I guess the analytical side of my brain would really prefer. So that was 5 minutes of rambling about this. In the end, I believe I gave it 4 stars because I do think it's a very helpful resource. I'm going to keep it. I'm going to refer back to it when I study more books in the Bible, and it was very helpful in my study of Colossians. So all in all, a very useful, practical, helpful book if you want to study your Bible. Right now, that one, by the way, I have been reading. I started it in June, so I've been reading a little bit of it every day. So I just finished it this past week. And then the other book that I read that I finished reading was finally For a Lifetime by Gabrielle Meyer. And that has been on my TBR for several months now since it was published, and I finally got around to reading it. So it was very good. Here's the funny thing. When I went to write my Goodreads review of it, I gave it 4.5 stars, and I was like, this is, you know, a little bit of a slip because the first 2 I gave 5 stars. That was my recollection of the first 2, was that they were, in my mind, they were 5-star books because they were really good. But then I actually went back and looked at my reviews of the first 2 books in the Timeless series by Gabrielle Meyer, and I realized that I had given each of them 4 stars. So this actually was an improvement. I bumped up to 4.5 stars. And I was looking at my reviews and seeing, you know, what were my thoughts that I gave it 4 stars rather than 5. And I was like, yeah, okay. For the second book, I honestly don't really remember the criticisms that I had of it. I'm sure it was valid because it was fresh in my mind when I wrote the review, but those aren't the things that I remember now looking back at the book. So all in all, it's an excellent series that I really enjoyed, and I always want to read the next one, which I don't know, not many series are like that for me. So I am really enjoying all of them. So ignore what I said in my Goodreads review. It actually was a very good book. I don't think that it's either more or less than the other books in this series. I think it was, you know, they've all been equally well written. So I think they're all 5-star books in terms of how much I enjoyed them and how compelling I think the story is, and the concept and the way that she works it out. All really great books. My only complaint about this one was, and I can't explain why without spoiling it, but she makes a much bigger deal, it seemed to me, in this book about the fact that when they are sleeping in each of their timelines, which if you don't know the concept of the story, it's these time crossers who live in 2 or more different time periods. And when they get to a certain age, they have to choose which time period they're going to stay in. And in this particular book, they were twins. And the author made a bigger deal in this book, I think, than in the other books, that when they were sleeping, that's when their conscious mind was in their other timeline. And I just mentally got a little bit stuck on the practical logistics of that. And I think I was probably just taking it too literally because it was just raising a lot of questions in my mind as I was reading that. And I much prefer just to think of it as that, you know, because this is the whole concept of time travel is kind of like a magical, fantastical, sci-fi sort of idea, that we just leave it at that it's unexplainable really to a certain extent, that it just works. Like they live 2 different timelines at the same time, simultaneously. And you don't put too much thought into how that could possibly work, because it couldn't possibly work. Like it doesn't happen. And if it were to happen, it would have to be something that would be outside our understanding, because we are our understanding is bound so much by the concept of time. So when it comes to time travel and that sort of thing, like, I feel like you just have to accept it as not something you're ever really gonna understand. So that was messing with my mind a little bit as I was reading this one and got a little bit in the way of the story. And there was one other thing. One of the twin sisters at the beginning was kind of in love with a guy who was actually really in love with her sister. And so it was like this unrequited love on both sides sort of thing. Like, she had unrequited love for him and he had unrequited love for her sister. And I don't know, I feel like it could have been, it didn't need to be there in the story because, one, it didn't come off as quite realistic, and two, it wasn't necessary to serve the plot of the story, I don't think. So I felt like that was a little bit unnecessary in the beginning of the story, and it also distracted me a little bit from the rest of it. But those were just minor things, and overall I really enjoyed this installment of the series. And I read the sneak peek to the book 4 that's coming out later this year, I think, and it looks really good too. So I'm looking forward to reading book 4 in this series, and I'm so glad I finally read book 3. That was for the deck of TBR-athon, and it also allowed me to color in a space for the summer book bingo, where the space that was Buzzy Book, I think. So I accomplished a couple things. Oh, and for the Ketchupathon, it was mac and cheese, 2 people on the cover. And then I also just started Ruth by Elizabeth Gaskell, which I am buddy reading with Kelly. And I am slowly working every day on reading The Dead Shall Rise. My goal is to finish it in August for the big book summer, but I'm kind of not killing myself. I'm just reading some every day. Yesterday it was like 3 or 4 pages, whatever. As long as I'm reading a little bit in every day, then I am fine with that. So that is my reading update, and we'll see what else I get read this week. Hello, it is Saturday morning, and I finished 2 books that I want to share with one final clip before I send this off to go live. I finished Always by Jody Hedlund and Evermore by Jody Hedlund. And Always is a prequel novella to a series, I forget the name of the series, by Jody Hedlund. And it's kind of difficult to classify exactly what this series is. It's definitely Christian fiction and it's definitely young adult, but beyond that, I'm not sure. It has elements of historical fiction, fantasy, and fairy tale, but it doesn't really fit well in either of those because there aren't really any magical elements, and the fantastical elements are kind of more of like imaginary than impossible and completely unrealistic in the sense of being fantastical, you know, like mythical creatures. There aren't any of those, or you know, magical powers or that kind of stuff. It's not that. It's just like, you know, the main girl in the story is extremely gifted in certain areas. You know, like she's all of the wonderful things, you know, kind of a fairy tale-esque sort of heroic female character. And the things that they are able to accomplish within the story border on impossible, at the very least highly unlikely. So it definitely has strong fairy tale fantasy vibes without actually being a fairy tale or a fantasy. So, but it was a fun read. It was definitely a change of pace for me. It worked well for the prompt, for the card that I drew in the deck of TBR-athon, where I was supposed to read a genre I rarely read. And I was thinking when I picked it up, like fantasy, I'm not sure that it's strictly fantasy. I think that's how one of the labels it was given on Goodreads. But anyway, kind of hard to put it in a box. But I did enjoy it. It's a fun read. It's definitely YA, so it's not real deep. It does have a good theme of seeking wisdom and being like a servant leader sort of thing. There's some really good concepts in there, but it's definitely written towards a young adult audience, and it definitely is a light read. It's not intending to be anything more than that. So it was good. It was a good change of pace for me, and I enjoyed them. I think I probably will give them both like 3.5 stars. So they were fine. You might enjoy them if you like that sort of story, or if you are like me and you're not really into fantasy per se, you might enjoy it as well because it's not really fully fantasy, in my opinion. That is the last that I read for this week. I'm still working on Ruth by Elizabeth Gaskell, which I am reading with Kelly at Kelly Reads a Lot. And we are just at the beginning of that, so I don't have much to report on that. And I am still working through And the Dead Shall Rise by Steve Oney. We're doing a weekend VBS at my church this week, so I don't know that I will get much reading in. So those two, however, are the ones that I'm working on currently. But before I completely close out this video, I wanted to first of all choose the winner of the book that I was giving away last week in my weekly wrap up. And we're going old school here, guys. Totally old school. So I have my mug. It may not be Pemberley, but it's home. And I took the names of the people who entered the giveaway and I put them in this cup. And I'm just going to pick one. So no random number generators on here. We old school. So which one should I get? And believe in yourself. So Tammy, I believe in yourself. I'll be contacting you to get your mailing address and I will send that off to you. And as promised, I have another book that I would like to give someone this week. And this is one of my favorite, not one of my favorite, easily my favorite nonfiction read from last year, from 2023. And it remains one of my favorite Christian nonfiction of all time. And that is Heaven by Randy Alcorn. This was a fantastic book, especially the first part of it. The second part of it kind of tends to get into more speculation, I guess. And then it wraps up nicely in part 3, but part 2 ends with more speculation, more like, well, it could be this, but we don't know for sure kind of thing. But part 1 was fantastic, laid a really solid foundation of theology about heaven based on scripture. And he does a really good job of showing how he came to his conclusions about what the Bible says about heaven. And so I would really love to pass this on to someone. Now, this is, I have to say, not a brand new, I didn't buy it new. I bought it used. However, there is nothing wrong with it. So, and I bought it purposely to give to someone because I just love the book so much. And when I saw it at a thrift store, I was like, in such great condition. I got it. So there's no markings on any of the pages that I can see. There are no corners flipped down. The binding is perfect. Everything is fantastic. The only thing is there is a little bit of like sticky residue right here on the spine. But even that, it's like, I think it could come off if you worked out a little bit. So I don't want to ruin the cover, but I think that could come off. But anyways, it's in fantastic condition. It's practically new. So if you would like to win this copy of this book, all you need to do is leave a comment below, just anything about this book or about heaven that you want to read it, or you have read it, or you would love to own a copy, or something that you are looking forward to about heaven, or something you wonder about heaven, etc. Just leave a note in the comments about this book or about heaven, and I will enter you in the giveaway, and I'll pick your name out of a mug next week. So also just to clarify, only in the United States, and I will be contacting you to get your mailing address to send you the book. So I hope someone who really wants to read this book will be able to win it. And that is all for this week. So I will see everyone next time. Bye.